Hello everyone, and welcome back to my series. Today, we continue with the tragic yet thrilling story of lythica. As you may remember from the previous episode, when the police cornered her with no way out, Hung's mother threw herself into the raging river to escape. For days, the atmosphere along the riverbank was heavy with dread. Everyone believed she had perished. When a body was discovered drifting downstream, people braced themselves for the painful truth. But then, the forensic results shocked everyone. It wasn't Hung's mother. She was still alive. And her survival wasn't a miracle, it was the beginning of a new nightmare. After escaping death, Hung's mother became colder and more ruthless than ever. She was no longer the fragile woman who once ran away. Hiding in the shadows, she watched lythica's every move, plotting her revenge in silence. Meanwhile, lythica, still trying to recover from her past wounds, had no idea that danger was creeping closer. Lately, lythica has begun to feel something is wrong. Late at night, she often hears faint footsteps outside her window or senses a pair of unseen eyes watching her from the darkness. She dismisses it as stress, but in truth, it's the first sign of a looming storm. Meanwhile, Hung, still lying in his hospital bed, has no idea his mother is alive. If he knew, could his heart bear it? And would he make it back in time to protect lythica before it's too late? As for Hung's mother, this time, she isn't just running. She has a plan. A cold, calculated plan. One wrong step, and everything will collapse. Will lythica be strong enough to confront this terrifying fear? Will Hung return in time before the darkness swallows them all? Or will history repeat itself with an even more devastating ending? Stay tuned for today's episode and uncover the truth hidden in the silence of the night, where, in just one moment, everything could change forever. ChatGPT said. After the harrowing moments of having to identify the body found by the river, Hung felt as if a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from his shoulders when he learned it wasn't his mother. In that instant, his legs nearly gave out, and he had to cling tightly to the cold steel railing just to stay upright. The river breeze blew past, carrying with it a biting chill, but to Hung, it felt like a breath of fresh air, a breath of hope that had never truly faded. He stood there for a long time, his gaze fixed on the rushing water, as if trying to find any trace of his mother. Memories flooded back, the image of a worn-out woman, her rough hands once shielding him in his childhood, intertwined with the haunting days when she had lost herself to her sins. Despite all the pain and the scars in his heart, Hung couldn't deny one truth: she was still his mother, the only person he loved and hated, pitied and couldn't let go of. When he returned home, his steps were heavy, but his mind felt a little lighter. As he opened the door, he saw lythica sitting in the living room, the warm glow of the lamp softening her face, making her eyes look unusually gentle. When she saw Hung, she quickly stood up and hurried over, worry written all over her face. How was it? Was it? Hung didn't answer right away. He walked closer, sat down beside her, and in a hoarse, exhausted voice that still carried a faint spark of hope, he said, "That body, it wasn't my mother. I told you, she's still alive. I've always believed that, even if everyone else said I was only fooling myself." Hearing his words, lythica froze for a moment. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes filled with both surprise and warmth. Gently, she placed her hand on his shoulder and nodded softly. "I believe that too, Hung. Maybe, she's still out there somewhere. And who knows? After everything she's been through, maybe she'll finally understand, and come back." Her words felt like a hand gripping Hung's heart, pulling him out of the endless torment he had been trapped in. He let out a deep breath, leaning back against the chair and staring up at the ceiling. For the first time in days, his eyes no longer held that sharp edge of tension. Instead, there was a rare calmness. "If my mother's still alive," Hung said slowly, almost as if speaking to himself, "I just hope she realizes everything, feels guilty for what she's done. And then, that she'll find the courage to walk into the police station and face it all herself." Hoài stayed quiet, listening without interruption, only tightening her grip on his hand as if to pass on her strength to him. She understood him better than anyone. She knew that beneath that steadfast exterior was a son who still longed to see his mother once more, if only to hear an explanation, or maybe even to forgive the hatred that weighed on his heart. Inside the small house, the atmosphere grew strangely still. The ticking of the clock echoed through the room, mingling with the steady rhythm of their breathing. Hung closed his eyes, and for the first time in countless sleepless nights, his mind was no longer filled with dark visions of death or dreadful premonitions. All he could see was a fragile, fleeting hope, but one strong enough to keep him going. Outside the window, the night deepened into darkness. And somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows, a pair of familiar, icy eyes continued to watch. Eyes that carried a silent storm no one could ever predict. Hung had finally managed to settle a large portion of the debt that had weighed him down for so long. From those grueling days when financial pressure crushed his shoulders, he could now finally breathe a sigh of relief. His eyes no longer carried the same gloom as before. Instead, there was a calmness and steadiness that even Hoài could see. The small house, once wrapped in tension, now began to feel warmer, as if the storms had finally passed, at least for a while. After many conversations, Hung finally agreed to let Hoài return to her own home. It was the place she once had to leave behind in fear and anxiety. But now, with things gradually settling down, Hoài could finally return without feeling like she was running away anymore. Hung understood that she deserved a peaceful life, rather than being tied forever to the painful memories of the past. As Hoài held the key in her hand, her fingers trembled slightly. She stood before the familiar door, where so many memories, both bitter and sweet, were kept. Her heart ached with a strange mix of nostalgia and distance. But this time, she wasn't alone. Hung stood beside her, his steady, reassuring gaze silently telling her she wouldn't have to face it all by herself. The house was just the same, simple and quiet. Hoài placed her hand on the old wall, noticing the small scratches she had once overlooked. Everything seemed to remind her that no matter how many hardships one endured, it was still possible to come back to where it all began. She smiled, softly, with relief, but also with a deep and unspoken emotion. "Thank you, Hung," Hoài whispered, her voice trembling. Hung simply nodded. He didn't say much, but his hand tightened around hers, a silent promise that from this moment on, he would do everything he could to protect this peace. And yet, in the quiet corners of Hoài heart, there was one lingering concern she could not hide: Hung's mother. Despite all the pain that woman had caused, Hoài still prayed in silence. Every night, before closing her eyes, she wished for the same thing, that Hung's mother was safe somewhere, that she would one day see the truth, turn herself in, and find redemption. Hoài knew it wouldn't be easy. But deep down, she believed that after everything, somewhere within Hung's mother, there had to be a sliver of conscience left, a trace of maternal love that could never truly be erased. And it was that fragile belief, a faint light in the darkness, that gave her the strength to keep hoping for a future free of pain and fear. In the days that followed, Hung and Hoài lives slowly returned to a gentle rhythm. In the mornings, they cooked together, cleaned the house, and talked about the simplest things. At night, as the streetlights cast their glow through the window, they sat side by side, quietly sharing dreams they once thought were far beyond their reach. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, this moment, this fragile peace, was something they had fought for with every tear and every scar. After a long period of struggling to pay off his debts, Hung was nearly exhausted. Endless days of hard work and sleepless nights, burdened by relentless worries, had aged him by what felt like 10 years. Every time he stood before the mirror, he saw his sunken eyes and pale complexion. Yet, he silently endured it all, holding on to one single belief: if he could just push himself a little further, he would bring Hoài to a peaceful life, free from the shadow of debt and suffering. But beyond the weight of daily survival, the emotional shock concerning his mother, the woman who had fled to escape the law, cut into his heart like a sharp blade. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her disappearing into the icy river that day, leaving him with an indescribable ache and torment. He loved his mother, but he also resented her. That very conflict made his already fragile heart even more weary. The first chest pain started as a dull ache. Hung thought it was just exhaustion from overwork and lack of sleep, something that would pass with a little rest. But the pain didn't fade. It grew sharper, more unbearable. There were moments when he had to stop in the middle of the street, clutching his chest, gasping for air, feeling as if an invisible hand was squeezing his lungs, stealing every breath. At last, when his body could no longer endure, Hung was forced to go to the hospital. He sat in the waiting room, hands clenched tightly, anxiety twisting in his chest. When the doctor reviewed his results, his expression turned grave. Removing his glasses, he looked straight at Hung and spoke in a firm, unquestionable tone. "You can't ignore this any longer. Your condition has worsened significantly. You need to be admitted to the hospital immediately for treatment." Hung froze. In that moment, all surrounding sounds seemed to vanish, leaving only the pounding of his own heart echoing in his ears. He stared down at the diagnosis paper in his trembling hands, feeling as though his entire world had collapsed. His thoughts immediately went to Hoài, the woman who had stood by him through every storm. He didn't want her to know. He didn't want her to shed another tear. "Doctor, is there any way I don't have to be admitted? I still have so many things I need to do," Hung pleaded, but the doctor firmly shook his head. "You no longer have a choice. If you delay this any further, the risks will be severe. You need treatment now. Complete rest. Strict adherence to the regimen." Faced with such resolve, Hung reluctantly signed the admission papers. But in that very moment, he silently made a decision: he would not tell Hoài. He didn't want her to worry, and he didn't want her to give up the fragile peace she had only just begun to find. If he endured the treatment quietly, he would recover in a few weeks and return as though nothing had ever happened. Yet, the days in the hospital were far from what Hung expected. Each morning, he awoke in a cold, sterile room, surrounded by the beeping of heart monitors and the distant echo of nurses' footsteps in the hallways. He lay there, staring at the stark white ceiling, swallowed by a crushing loneliness. Many times, he picked up his phone, wanting to send Hoài a simple message, "I'm okay," to ease her worries. But every time, he put it down, convincing himself that silence was kinder for her. Meanwhile, in the old house, Hoài began to sense that something was wrong. Days had passed without a single visit from Hung. At first, she thought he was just buried in work, especially after the chaos surrounding his mother. She tried to reassure herself. "He just needs time, maybe work is overwhelming right now." But as the silence stretched on, it became terrifying. Each night, Hoài sat by the window, staring into the dark, clutching her phone without the courage to call. Over and over, she typed the same message, "Where are you?" only to erase it. A gnawing unease grew inside her, a dreadful feeling that something terrible was happening just beyond her reach. And Hung's silence only tightened its grip on her heart, like a quiet storm looming on the horizon, warning her that this was only the beginning. After narrowly surviving her plunge into the river, Hung's mother felt neither remorse nor the slightest hint of awakening as Hung had once hoped. On the contrary, deep within her mind, resentment burned like a smoldering flame, growing fiercer with every passing day. She was convinced that everything she had suffered, being hunted, living like a fugitive, and losing everything, was all because of Hoài. Night after night, in the ramshackle shelters near the border, she would sit silently by the window, her clouded eyes gleaming with hatred. Each time she pictured Hoài face, her chest tightened, and her rage surged uncontrollably. She told herself, "If it weren't for that woman, none of this would have happened. She stole my son. She stole my life. She will pay for this." Instead of escaping across the border as she once had, a far bolder plan began to take root in her mind. She would no longer run. She would return. Not to turn herself in. Not to repent. But to take revenge. And with each passing day, that plan became clearer, sharper, more unshakable. In the darkness of those endless nights, she quietly reached out to a few old contacts, people she had known during her time in hiding. Through them, she began gathering information about Hoài. Every piece of news, no matter how small, became a fragment of the vengeful puzzle she was piecing together. To her, Hoài was the source of all her misery. Consumed by hatred, she no longer saw any line between right and wrong. There was only one truth left in her heart: no matter the cost, Hoài must suffer as she had suffered. And then, one night, as the wind howled through the cracks of her decaying hideout, she smiled, a cold, lifeless smile. It carried none of the warmth of the mother who once loved her son. In that moment, there was only a woman completely devoured by vengeance, ready to return and unleash a new storm of tragedy. Meanwhile, Hung, lying silently in his hospital bed, battling his illness, had no idea that a far greater storm was brewing outside. And Hoài, she too was unaware that the fragile peace she had just reclaimed was nothing more than the calm before the coming tempest. And Hung's mother had already begun her journey back. After returning, Hung's mother almost completely vanished from everyone's sight. She was no longer the frantic woman constantly on the run. Instead, she became a shadow, silent, elusive, living in secrecy with one single purpose: Hoài. She began retracing old clues, eventually finding the house where Hoài once lived. When night fell, she would sit motionless in the darkness, her sharp, cold eyes fixed on the door that had long remained closed. In her mind, only one thought echoed: as soon as she comes back, as soon as I see her. In the beginning, she waited patiently, like a predator stalking its prey. She watched every sound, every flicker of light in the neighborhood. Whenever a stranger passed by, she would stare intently, her heart pounding, only to feel the bitter sting of disappointment when she realized it wasn't Hoài. Days turned into nights, and nights into weeks. The bitter cold forced her to wrap herself in her worn-out coat, but her gaze never strayed from that door. Every time she remembered the icy river she had once leapt into to escape, every time she relived the humiliation she had endured, the hatred inside her flared hotter, fueling her determination to wait, no matter how many endless, silent days dragged by. But as more days passed without even a glimpse of Hoài, her patience began to fray. One night, as she sat on the creaking wooden chair of an abandoned porch nearby, she muttered under her breath, "You wretched girl, where are you? Don't think you can hide from me forever." Doubt began to creep in. Perhaps Hoài no longer lived there. But instead of giving up, her resolve hardened. If Hoài wouldn't come back to this old house, she would find another way. She was certain that if she waited long enough, if she was relentless enough, she would uncover her whereabouts. What she didn't know was that Hoài was now living somewhere else, under Ha's roof. And this futile, obsessive watch in the shadows was merely the beginning of a far more brutal confrontation quietly drawing near. After days without a single word from Hung, the unease in Hoai's heart grew like a relentless undertow, impossible to control. She had called him dozens of times, but every attempt only ended in the same hollow, unanswered ringing. She went to his workplace, but even Hung's colleagues had no idea where he was. Each night, Hoai tossed and turned, her eyes red from lack of sleep, her mind trapped in a single, tormenting question: where is he? Has something happened to him? Unable to bear it any longer, that morning, Hoai decided to return to the old house, the place that had witnessed so many turning points in her life. Part of her hoped to find Hung there, another part clung to a desperate belief that she might discover some clue that would lead her to him. The sky that day was heavy with darkness, thick clouds swallowing what little daylight there was. The wind howled through the bare trees, sending a shiver down her spine. Her footsteps echoed on the deserted road leading to the old house, each sound unnervingly sharp, as if warning her of something ominous ahead. The rusty iron gate creaked open. Inside, the house looked just as it always had, but the air was different. It carried an eerie stillness that made Hoai's heart pound in her chest. She stepped forward cautiously, unaware that in the suffocating darkness, a pair of eyes had been watching her all along. Hung's mother. She was there. For days, she had been nothing but a shadow, lurking, waiting, her hatred simmering in silence. On those freezing nights, she crouched in the corners of the house, her bloodshot eyes burning with sleepless fury. And now, seeing Hoai step through the door, every ounce of restraint inside her erupted like a violent storm. With a sudden, feral motion, she lunged from the shadows. Her eyes gleamed with a predatory rage. Without warning, her hand shot forward, grabbing a fistful of Hoai's hair and yanking it so hard that pain shot through her skull. The force of it stunned her, her body stumbling as she fought to keep her balance. "You vile woman. This is all your fault. All of it." Hung's mother screamed, her voice ragged with hatred, her grip merciless. Hoai's eyes went wide in panic, her whole body trembling. She struggled desperately, but the woman's strength, fueled by years of pent-up fury, was monstrous. Her hands were like iron clamps, holding Hoai in place. "Let me go!" Hoai cried out, her voice breaking, trembling with fear. But Hung's mother didn't answer. She dragged her closer, her breath cold and sharp against Hoai's skin, her eyes blazing with the raw, consuming fire of vengeance. Hoai could feel her nails digging painfully into her scalp. Panic clawed at her chest as her gaze darted around the empty house. No one was there. No one could hear her. In that moment, Hoai realized she was standing at the edge of life and death. The woman before her was no longer just a grieving mother, but a creature hollowed out by hatred, with nothing left but vengeance. And all Hoai could do was tremble and pray for a miracle, because if none came, there would be no escape from the merciless grip tightening around her. The atmosphere inside the old house felt suffocating, as if the air itself had turned thick and heavy. The moss-covered, time-worn walls stood like silent witnesses to countless tragedies, amplifying the oppressive silence. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks of the door, its eerie wails sounding like distant cries of anguish, blending with the frantic pounding of Hoai's heart to create a terrifying symphony, one meant only for those standing on the razor's edge of fear. Hoai was held tightly by Hung's mother. Her bony, ice-cold hand gripped like an unyielding vice, impossible to escape. Hoai struggled, her wide, panic-stricken eyes darting around the room, but there was nothing, only still, smothering darkness. No light. No hope. Hung's mother stared at her, eyes burning with venom. Those eyes, once belonging to a mother, were now nothing but a pit of darkness, rage, and madness. Years of hiding, torment, and bitterness had driven her to the edge, to a place where compassion no longer existed. "It's you. It's all because of you." Her hoarse voice trembled with fury, every word dripping with hatred long suppressed. Hoài trembled, her lips quivering but no sound escaping. She couldn't understand how a person could hate her this much. Her hair was yanked painfully, but what terrified her even more was the murderous glare inching closer with every second. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Hung lay in his hospital bed. The cold, sterile light above cast a pale glow on his weakened face. Each slow, faint heartbeat worried even the doctors. Yet, in his haze, Hung felt it, a gnawing sense of dread, as if a whisper was calling out to him, "Hoài, danger." Despite his frail condition, Hung forced his eyes open, fighting to rise. But the 4 lines and medical equipment tethered him down like chains. He didn't know what was happening, but his instincts screamed at him, if he didn't act now, he would lose the most important thing in his life. Would Hung learn the truth before it was too late? Could he break free from everything holding him back and reach Hoài, the woman now trapped in unimaginable terror within that old house? And what of Hung's mother, the woman blinded by hatred? What would she do next? Would she stop at threats, or would she unleash her full, uncontrollable wrath upon Hoài, the person she believed had ruined her life? In this moment of despair, could a miracle happen? Would a door suddenly burst open, a familiar voice call out, or a strong hand pull Hoài from the edge of darkness? Or, was it all just a fragile illusion in this suffocating night? All these questions remain unanswered. The tension hung in the air like a taut string, ready to snap with the slightest touch. So, what will happen next? Will Hung's mother truly harm Hoài? Will Hung, lying gravely ill in his hospital bed, realize that his mother has returned to confront her? And will he find the strength to escape and save her before it's too late? Leave your predictions in the comments below. And don't miss tomorrow's episode, where the truth will be revealed, where every knot of tension will be pulled tighter, until it all explodes in a climax you won't be able to look away from.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình đang vừa hoàn thành xong video mà mình lên trong ngày hôm nay cho mọi người xem đây. Bữa nay thì do một số công việc cá nhân nên là cái tiến độ làm video và lên video của mình nó không được đều đặn. Trước thì mình thường sẽ lên video vào 2 khung giờ, nhưng mà do thời gian gần đây có quá nhiều công việc nên mình chỉ có thể lên được 1 khung giờ. Và trong thời gian tới thì mình sẽ cố gắng lên được thêm nhiều video trong nhiều khung giờ nữa hơn. Mình hy vọng rằng mọi người sẽ ủng hộ cho kênh mình nhiều hơn, cũng như là để cho kênh mình ngày càng phát triển hơn. Và nếu như mọi người yêu quý kênh thì hãy like, share video hoặc là để lại bình luận, và đặc biệt là nhớ đăng ký kênh, sau đó bật chuông thông báo lên để mỗi khi kênh mình ra video mới thì sẽ có thông báo đến mọi người để mọi người kịp thời xem.